Hey guys, back in the early 80s, I heard a story of a Mexican who'd been helping Doc Noss on Victorio Peak. This Mexican happened to be down inside Victorio Peak in the catacombs when Doc Noss set off a charge that caved the whole thing in. Now, I don't think Doc Noss knew this Mexican was down in there, but this Mexican, over a period of 2 or 3 days, found his way out, found another exit way to get out of this caved-in thing that Doc Noss had blown up. But what I didn't know, and what I just barely found out, was that Mexican was Salvador Delgadillo's grandfather. And here to tell us that story, and also about his other grandfather who was helping the Peralta family and the superstitions. And so here's Salvador with that story, and just keeping the history alive with one interview after another. Here's the story. Okay, I'm with Salvador Delgadillo at the 18th annual Dutch Handers Rendezvous at the Don's Camp in the Superstition Mountains, and I did a story last night on Victorio Peak, and Salvador was telling me that he has a story about that. So Salvador, take it away. Tell me about that.
Okay, I was born in 1951, and in the 50s my mother told me she was an American citizen. And I don't believe her because everybody's mother was Mexican. She told me the story about when she was a very young girl. His father worked for Dr. Starr, and that she was there when his cousin went into the tunnel. It was a spring, like a different spring, that across the tunnel. They went past that, and it was skeletons, and he got scared. And he went and picked up silver church artifacts. She never mentioned gold bars, no nothing. And when he came out, she was here, and his father and his cousin was there when they blew out the entrance. His name was Dr. Starr, and I was in the 30s. And she told me that one day when I was 15, I became an American citizen, and then she wanted me to go and recover it. And when I was in Mexico, you know, I was under 10 years old, and I never forgot the story. And so I come here when I was 66, and I was 15 years old, and when I was 22, I went to Florida, and I stayed in Florida from 73 to 82. In 1980, I read a book a paperback book by John Newman, and it talks about 100 tons of gold, and the book caught my attention. And that book verified what my mother told me back in the 50s when I was under 10 years old. And they changed the name to Dr. Noss, and I was trying to figure out how two stories be the same. Because my mother spelled the name Star with double R, and in the American alphabet, and no double R, a single R, not double R. And I tried to piece it together, and I came to the conclusion that I was talking about the same treasure. And that was when I bought the book, was in Key West, Florida in 1980. 2 years later, I come here to Apache Junction, and I happened to mention Newman. He was in Tucson, coming north to Apache Junction to go to Globe, checking on things. And I told this story about what my mother told me in the 50s. They said, Salvador, your mother had to have been there, otherwise she don't know the details. And I had like 2 dimes and a nickel in my pocket. I was living under a kitchen table with a black plastic on top of it. And Chuck Rappel's camp right here in Apache Trail. And he told me that he paid for everything if I go back with him to New Mexico because of my mother's stories. And finally he told me his business card, he thought, 1-800 number. And I said, you know what, you're lucky, I only had 10 cents and 1 nickel in my pocket because I'm the kind of person that I pay my way. I don't want nothing for free. And he gave me the car, and I never called him because I never have enough money to to pay my way. He was about 60 years old. Now 40 years later, he will be around 100, and he comes from El Paso, Texas. And I recommend that anybody who's interested in Victorio Peak to please research his John Newman's story, because it matches my mother's story. Who was she told me the story 20-some years before the book came out. So one of the persons who was with him, that if he's still alive, will be Ashley Bailey. And he told me stories about that thing, and he said, Salvador, I want to take you with me. And I said, I can. I'll pay my way. That's one of the things I want to know, because the key was come out later. Bob Shoes, one time he went and somebody gave him a book about Victorio Peak and the airlines.
Yeah.
And in the book, they found a piece of wood with a knife carved, the name S-T-A-R-R. So that verified my mother's stories about he was going by the name Star. The American changed it for STR. And when I researched why the double R, because in American there's no double R, come to the conclusion that the only person, well, actually the only tribe in the United States that used the double R is the Cherokees. So that led me to believe that he was far Indian. Now everybody's saying that he was far Indian, but I don't tell you which tribe.
Yeah.
And if you go by the name Star, it brings you down to the Cherokee tribe. And that's why it's very important to listen to everybody's story, because if you get everybody's story, you can piece it together and come to one conclusion. And that's something I will never forget.
So you're talking about Doc Noss, Victorio Peak, the 100 tons of gold that was there. It's a big, long, huge story, but it was your father that was involved?
No, my mother's father, she was a little ghetto.
Your mom's father was involved with Doc Noss and the
well, that's Dr. Starr. Dr. Starr was
Dr. Starr is what they called him at the time.
Yeah, at that time.
But you're saying Benny Santiago, who was helping Doc Noss and was in the tunnel when blew the tunnel up, and Doc Noss didn't know that he was in there.
I don't know if he was worried about alive or not, but my mother said that when they blew out the entrance, the mining engineer blew out the entrance and asked her if it was an accident, and she was told that was sabotage. That somebody did, he don't know what Dr. Starr did it on purpose or the engineer did it on purpose. But the funny thing about it is that people like to talk about conspiracy, and I'm not a conspiracy follower. But not too long after that, the U.S. Immigration Department gave her father two choices: become an American citizen or go back to Mexico. And her father was very proud. He decided to go to Mexico. And my mother, looking back, my mother grew up in Mexico. She was born in Texas, Uvalde, Texas, and she was raised in Mexico. And she was kind of bitter because she felt like she got deprived about part of the wealth. So she she told me, when you're 15 years old, go and recover what belonged to us. And I told my mother it was crazy, you know. But the thing is that there was a accident, or actually part of the conspiracy thing to put a lid on it. Because my grandfather will stay here, could have been told a different story. But she was born and raised in Mexico, so and she was too young to remember exactly where. So you never know. I believe that the Victorio Peak conspiracy that everybody talks about have been going on for a long time since the 30s. But everybody want to talk about the 77 with Ashley Bailey and John Newman. But when you start putting up, it's been going on since the 30s. Why he will call a Star to the Mexicans and Dr. Noss to the Americans? It's like somebody trying to split the story in two. That way, when you talk about Dr. Starr and Dr. Noss, you think that two different people, but they're the same.
Yeah.
And everybody talk about Doc Noss, but you have to go beyond Doc Noss, backwards. And that's what my mother told me, and it matches.
So you was also telling me that your great grandfather.
Yeah, my
What kind of led you back here to the Superstition Mountains is about your great grandfather. Tell me about that.
When I come here in '82, I told people about that 3 people survived, and my great grandfather was one of them, and everybody thought I was crazy.
3 people survived what?
The Peralta massacre.
So the Peraltas were here in the Superstitions mining, and the Indians killed them all but 3, and your great grandfather was one of them that survived.
Because if you follow the story, they come from Santa Fe, and when they got here by the Soul River, they kind of lost the track, and they had to get hold of Kit Carson, and it's a beautiful monument by the Gila River, by Kearney, for Kit Carson to help the American army to come this way. And the funny thing about it, you pay attention that the mules was very heavy loaded, and they lost the tracks in the Superstition Mountain, and the track disappeared. The only way they can track disappear is by unloading it or losing the cargo. Because because when you got heavy footprints for the load, and all of a sudden get light, that means you somebody dumped something. And he went from here all the way to almost Mexico City to Guadalajara, where my grandfather was born. Then my father was born. And then my father met my mother, and I was born in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, next to Brownsville. So I got treasure hunter on my grandfather's side and treasure hunter on my mother's side. And my great grandfather went there. He never come back. My grandfather was born in Guadalajara, and he never come back. My father was born there, and he come to the United States, and I come. Well, my point is that, it's a lot of history, and I was working volunteer when a gold field goes down to keep alive the legends of the Superstition Mountain. And one day, a lady showed up, and she said, I asked her who you are. She said, my name is Leslie Peralta. And she said, my mother told me lots of stories about the Peraltas. I don't believe her. She come from California. And I said, well, you know what? I never met your mother, but I don't think your mother is lying to you. And she said, why? I said, because 3 survived. And for years and years, I've been telling people that 3 survived. And one of them, my grandfather, based on your mother's stories, you're the 2nd survivor. And now I'm looking for the 3rd survivor that I can find. And one day, she brings his mother from California, and she come here to the dance when the dance track was open here, in this area. He come to the dance because I wanted to show her that people are still keeping the Peralta legends alive. And we've been good friends. She used to be a political person in California, and she kind of relate, and she donated pictures and that kind of things for the Museum of Goldfield, based on the family, because she believed it. So based on what I know, my grandfather survived, his great grandfather survived, and the story is still going on. We're still looking for the 3rd person that survived. And the story about the Peraltas, it's a true story. Just people want to make it into a all story, up and down, up and down, up and down, and that's what people don't take it serious, because it's not a story. It goes up and down, up and down, and I believe that if people pay attention, one day they will find something.
You got anything else you want to?
Oh no, I would like to thank you, Terry Carey, for keeping the past alive, because.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for sharing your stories.
Yeah.
And that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.